You are welcome along to the Huddle Breakdown with two raspberry-looking middle-aged guys who just got done exercising. How you doing, Alan? Are you
Oh
ready to
yeah.
keel over like I am?
Yeah. This exercise lark is overrated, I have to say.
Tell me about it. I'm just back from being out of town for a few days, and I felt it was one of those guilt workouts. I've been such a debacle with my eating and drinking over the last few days. I felt guilted into getting it out of the way. Having some nice weather here locally finally as well, so outside to enjoy it before we record here. Um, so yeah, second one of the week. End is out. Being a productive member of society, unlike Alan and myself, just kind of slagging off here on a Friday. Um, so we wanted to revisit a little bit on the Aberdeen game. I think in our before we went live here, Alan, you expressed some desire to maybe provide an update to some of your analysis and comments that you made from earlier in the week when you and Endo were rude enough to record something without me.
Well, we'll keep going off on your jollies, but yeah. Listen, so the bit we did earlier in the week, I'll be completely honest with you. When I did the Aberdeen game, when we did the podcast. Sorry, I was halfway through doing my routine of capturing all the data myself, analyzing it, sort of deep dive type of thing. So I'd really only got up to half time. So most of my comments were kind of based on what happened in the first half, and the first half was pretty grisly, really, in terms of what happened in transition to Celtic shape was really nasty. And I put a tweet out about McGregor, which I kind of I don't normally do that, and the reason I don't do it is because normally when I watch it back without the emotion taken away, I usually feel different about things. And actually, so apologies to Callum McGregor, because although absolutely he got caught a couple of times, um, the reason that Celtic were in trouble weren't necessarily his fault. I mean, he was actually been put into a really bad situation. Um, so, in a nutshell, then, what I was really referring to in that first half against Aberdeen was there were three moments in the game, and you might think, well, that's not very many, but bear with me, where Celtic lost the ball in a central position. Now, two of those were Callum McGregor, and rule number one of a pivot, of a number six, of the holding midfielder, whatever you want to call that role, is you've got to be safe in possession. You do not give the ball away. It's actually worse to give the ball away in a central position sometimes, most of the time actually, than it is even if it's in the opposition half sometimes, than it is to give it away wide, right? Because the space and the options that a team has got breaking and transition are just massively more. So three times in that first half. Once McGregor lost it on halfway. That was in the very early in the game. Aberdeen broke down the right, and they ended up with a free kick just outside the box. Then a few minutes later, Abada lost it after a Celtic corner, I think it was. And again, Aberdeen were able to break, and it was immediately 3-on-3. And I think they butchered it, and nothing came of it. And then just before half time, McGregor lost it again, right on the edge of his own box. And again, from that, they got a really good shot away. And then from the resulting corner, they got another chance. So that's the impact of losing the ball centrally. Um, and the reason for it, not piling in on Carol McGregor, is we talk about, or you might have seen people talk about rest defense, right? So what rest defense means is actually quite literal. It's not very technical. What it means is when you think about Postecoglou, the way he set his team up, you typically had five players that were pushed right on, and they were the ones leading the charge, leading the attack, which meant you had five players who may well have been supplementing the attack, but think of them as the ones that were kind of holding the fort. So that's the rest. So how are the rest lined up when you lose the ball is the question, and that's your rest defense. And again, to Postecoglou, we had a little kind of 2-3 wedge in the center of the pitch, so that if we lost the ball, we probably gave away the flanks, but we usually had the middle secured. What's happened in that first half against Aberdeen was when we lost the ball centrally, you had the fullbacks high and wide, you had O'Reilly and Turnbull pushed on, and you had Callum McGregor all in his little trying to help basically repel the charge of the animal, which was exactly what used to happen to Scott Brown under Neil Lennon, right? And it's just a really shitty situation to be in. So you just don't want to be in that situation now. What I didn't say on Monday, and this is all setting you up, James, for your own view on this, really, is that in the second half, Rodgers identified this. So he took Turnbull off. Turnbull tends to favour the spaces are more around sort of outside the box, higher up, that sort of 10 space, if you like. And he brought on Hatate. And if you look at Hatate's kind of heat map and activity map, he actually played very close to McGregor. And that just immediately made it more solid. And then O'Reilly pulled back more to the right and he dropped a bit and it just became a tighter three. So that was good. They saw the problem, they did something about it. And actually, what then happened is McGregor controlled the game. I think he made something like 25 passes in the first half, but in the second he made 39, just like 14 more than any other player. So he actually got that. He actually was given the time and the space because he had that support, he had that coverage. He was able to control the game. And Celtic actually, I think, only gave up about 0.2 xg in that second half. They basically shut Aberdeen down pretty effectively, apart from maybe one chance near the end. So that was that. So I wanted to give that full story. I was probably wrong if I was piling in on McGregor. He wants to play and he shouldn't, but he was given no support. And when he was given support, we saw the Callum McGregor that we all recognised running and controlling the game. But that is one impact of tweaking that Rodgers has done. But credit to him, he saw that and he changed it for the second half.
Yeah, while I was away, I listened to the show from earlier in the week, and I largely agreed with what you and Enda had to say. I think again, if you just kind of look at and everything you just described there fits with kind of the statistical breakdown that I looked at, and if you look at kind of the race chart of XG, for example, it was pretty much a coin flip game up until about the 55th minute. Um, so you're right. After that point, and particularly, when the subs come on, this is something we've talked about forever now. It's it's almost unfair with the 5 subs, with the depth that we have relative to
And the and
the
the
rest.
and the and the time. And the time, by
Yeah,
the way. If we're going to start playing real time,
yeah,
that's going to be hugely beneficial to Celtic. They want the ball in play, better players, you want the ball fitter players, you want the ball in play more.
yeah, yeah. It increases our chances of even more dominance in theory. And this goes back. The only real observation I had is more of a esoteric one, that I thought to maybe add from what your conversation was earlier in the week, is it goes back to this. Coming out of that game, I listened to a lot of different conversations on BBC Scotland and other characterizations of the game, and generally speaking, I would say that the narrative was how much Aberdeen gave it a go, relatively complimentary, continuing this narrative of Robson from last season, which again, generally, someone that I'd like to see do well, um, kind of biased in that direction. But this goes back to, we've talked about this before. Um, that when you take that game and kind of distill it down to chance creation, it was not dissimilar to us versus a Real Madrid, right? When you think about it from they basically gave us 2.5 xg in chance creation. I shouldn't gave us. We created that much. The way they played enabled that to happen, meaning that they didn't bunker, they didn't park the bus, they didn't just play on the counter, which again they get plaudits for. But ultimately, over the full, probably approaching 100 minutes now in a game with 5 subs, we're just going to rip teams apart to do this. So if you put the broader context of this is that, you could argue our manager got the tactics wrong to begin with, right? Just based off of what you just described. To his credit, probably got it right in the second half, made the adjustment. That's all positive. For the first 50 to 55 minutes, it was basically a coin flip. We played pretty poorly, I would say, even within the context of the tactics maybe not being great, meaning guys were giving the ball away, and it was just kind of a helter-skelter kind of a game up until we really took a foothold. So generally speaking, I would characterize that game as one where most things broke in Aberdeen's way for the most part, and we still beat them 3-1, and we still got 2.5 in XG. This is why I keep saying, like, over time, for teams to do that against us, even at home, the vast majority of the time, it's like us trying to go toe to toe with Real Madrid. It's just maybe once out of 50 games, you'll get a result playing that way. But generally speaking, to me, it's just kind of ludicrous. I get the cultural aspect as far as having a go, so to speak, and not bunkering. But to me, it's just it's such an interesting dichotomy and narrative relative to the Goodwin performance where they lost 1-0 and were very close to getting a draw. And he was absolutely slaughtered for that game. Versus this game with Robson, where maybe on another day they get a draw, but for the most part, probably not. I mean, um, so it's just to me, they're not that different types of games. And if you play each of them 100 times, I'd argue the Goodwin path is way more likely to get them points. I actually I'm not critical of Robson in the sense that this early in the season, it's probably chalked up as a loss for the most part. I mean, probabilistically, I mean, I'm sure he doesn't think that way, and you don't go into a game as a competitor thinking you're going to lose. But if you're trying to set the culture of a team, and there's other objectives here as far as longer term objectives as a coach and a manager that I could empathize with. But to me, it was just another example of a team against us domestically that try to go toe to toe with us to a degree, and we'll see more of that on Sunday. I suspect Sunday we're going to see a team that's not going to do that. So this is going to be like
Yeah, so
the first two games. Ross
yeah.
County and Aberdeen have pretty much played pretty open, and I suspect Mr. McInnes may not be as aggressive.
Yeah, yeah. No, I will get into Kilmarnock in a bit, but I think so. Just again, in the interest of balance, I've made my McGregor amends. I'm going to slightly make my Barry Robson amends. I think we were a little bit quizzical about Barry Robson's capabilities before the game. I thought credit to them. Listen, I thought it was a really exciting game of football, especially the first half. In terms of, if you were a neutral watching it, it would have been a terrific game of football. Really, I think we controlled it pretty effectively in the second half. But and also what I realised is that probably I think because of injury, I don't think he would have Devlin in the back three normally. And I think Mackenzie's really a left back, not a centre back. And then they've got the new guy Rubezic, who looks like a pretty limited but no nonsense sort of central defender. He's just going to defend, right? And what I didn't maybe appreciate is he was very limited, Robson, because none of those three players were good at passing the ball. None of them are really strong at distribution. So, immediately you're kind of limited as to what you can do with that in terms of getting the ball forward. And then, I thought that the lad on the left, Duncan, he did pretty well. Clarkson's, as I said before, is a good player. Paul Vara actually surprised me, but he's just so slow. I mean, they could have really hurt us on the break if he wasn't so slow. But he's got decent sort of technique, and the two strikers I think are excellent. They're really good, especially at SPFL level. So I thought they did pretty well actually, but I think we made a rod for our own back. And to your point about the XG, I mean, I'm using my model. I had both games, Ross County and us, at just around about 3 XG, right? And for the opposition, around about 1. So 3-1 on XG both games. Now, that's really interesting because that's what we thought Ange Ball was going to be like. We were
Hmm.
told Ange Ball was going to be, oh, you got to create tons of chances. 3 XG, it's like that's if you average 3 XG, that's pretty remarkable over a long sample. But at the other end, you're not even getting to you're not even keeping them to 1 XG. It's actually going over that. That's exactly what Ange Ball was supposed to be, and it actually was that like Ange Ball when he in the first sort of 2 months
When
that
he
he
first
was here.
arrived, yep,
So we're so
yep,
we're so we're actually going back to the chaos a little bit of the games that we had when we first were under Ange, which is fascinating. Um, but what happened with under Ange Ball is that we just over time we gradually strangled the opposition, such that Celtic maintained 2.5 to 3 XG per game, but the oppositions went down to like 0.6 and 0.5 at times. It was just like you're never going to score consistently on that basis. So I don't know if that's what's going to happen. As I say, I was torn. On one side, as a football fan, I thought it was a terrific game of football. We won 3-1. It's a tough place to go.
yep.
I thought they were a good side. I think they're going to take a lot of points at home over the season. So I thought it was a great win. With my analyst head on and sort of looking at it from a sort of benchmarking perspective versus last year, I was like, oh my God, we're so open. Look at all these chances we're creating and all that. And that's what I was kind of fixating on. when I was watching games. So both these things can still be true.
Yep.
But we're here to do the latter, to focus on the latter. To be fair, so we've done that. But yeah, I just thought it was fascinating that we've almost out Ange Ball uh, under Rodgers in the first two games. So fascinating to see how that goes.
Yeah, and this goes back to again, just from a probability perspective, if we concede in that kind of 1+ range, that introduces the opportunity of these weird games where you drop points, even though you dominate. That you're talking about. You can get 3 or 4 decent quality chances from the opposition, kind of wedged within that, and you saw that in the game against Aberdeen. I mean, if Shinnie scores on that header, which wouldn't have been a crazy scenario, that was a pretty open opportunity head on the header. And Hart was basically a half yard away from maybe getting a red card, right? So that's when you allow those kind of that amount of chances. That's what made the Ange Ball era, once he settled in, kind of post window or into autumn of his first season, that we just squeezed teams to the point where they almost got nothing other than maybe a set piece or two, or a couple of shots from outside the box. Was you know the chances of them scoring are just so minute, game to game. um and you saw that to some degree, and that's what made the Rodgers first season so kind of miraculous, is to be able to go undefeated, is because you just get, and there were games in there where you kind of get a little bit of the luck, and you have to, in order to not drop points to any significant degree over that length of time. So yeah, I agree. It'll be interesting. I suspect, to your point, I mean, um, Rodgers is apt to make changes, and we talked about this recently about he's probably still in the period of experimentation and kind of figuring out how he wants to do things. And that's the nice part, is we kind of have this buffer of dominance that we can afford those opportunities to do that and still hopefully not drop points, like some other teams have. So, well, let's transition. We've got some news here coming out of the week. We've got some impacts on the defensive line at the center back position, both from a new signing that was formalized, a contract extension, now some a double barrel injury news in the back line, and quite a bit of injury news, unfortunately, this week, which I actually tweeted about. It's quite upsetting to a degree for me, anyway. Um, so, what are your thoughts on Lagerbilk signing, if you have any, and then the Welsh extension? Knowing that it looks
Sure.
like, well, I saw a picture on Twitter. He's in a boot. I don't know what that means, but I think Roger said he got a knock in training. Hopefully, it's not too bad, but add it to the list with I think Carter Vickers with a hamstring now. So we're going to need Lagerbilk, I think.
Yeah, I mean, well, so lots to unpack there. Yeah, it looks like Welsh has signed a new contract, and then in the next training session, he's ended up in a boot in hospital, which Rogers described in the press conference as a knock, which is gilding the lily a little bit by the looks of it. Now, we don't know what the issue is, we don't know how serious it is, but the chances of him playing on Sunday look very, very bleak. Just on Welsh, then, so as I said on the week there, so my personal view, looking at it through a what's the best thing for Celtic lens, is assuming that Lagerbielke was going to sign, and that left us with Nawrocki, Carter Vickers, and Lagerbielke. To me, if we kept Stephen Welsh, to me that's a good four centre backs, and I was happy with that. I think Welsh is perfect for that role. I think he's pretty consistent when he does play, and he's asked to step in. He seems to be able to step in without much kind of settling in period. He seems to hit the ground running pretty quickly. He came on at half time against Aberdeen, and he was, as I say, much better, a much more solid defensive performance from Celtic in that second half. So I was really happy with it. I just don't think it makes any sense for Stephen Welsh, is really where I'm coming from, which is, maybe not for me to say. It's just my opinion. I mean, 23-year-old, a guy who I think is good enough. I mean, centre half is a position that the Scotland national team is very weak in. Um, Clark often plays three at the back. To me, Welsh would be perfect for the right hand side of a three. I think that's probably his ideal defensive position. He's not necessarily the relied upon, therefore, to be the lead clearer out of headers and marker of big lumps, and he's good on the ball. So if you get the ball to him, he can distribute well from that sort of inside right position at the back, and he's not over, and he's quick enough that he can cover. So I think Welsh is good enough that if he were playing for a team other than Celtic and playing every week at a good level, and as I say, previously there'd been rumours from he was a sort of player that because he's the sort of centre back that is more attractive to leagues where they play more football than he is to a league like Scotland where it's hoof it up to the big lad because he's not particularly large guy, he's not particularly dominant in the air, and that's what people fixate on, but actually he's a good footballer. So a French league, Italian league, you know, he's the sort of centre back they want. They don't worry to fixate too much about his height. Is he mobile? Can he pass the ball? Can he progress the ball? He can do all those things. So the thought of Stephen Welsh playing in a sort of mid-table, French league team or Italian Serie A team, that to me, sounds like a great way for him to build his career, get into the Scotland national team and really push on individually. So I'm kind of surprised from his perspective. He's obviously bought whatever it is Rodgers is selling, and I think that's great for Celtic. I just don't see how it's great for Stephen Welsh, but I'm not Stephen Welsh.
Yeah, I think so. I agree with everything that you said. I think the interesting part will be so Rodgers has had a history of playing three at the back. Um, for significant periods of time. I wouldn't say a primary shape that he's used, but we've even talked about the Lustig role during his first tenure as that being, in possession versus out of possession type of thing. And we effectively played three at the back in possession in attack with Lustig as kind of the right center back at times. And I agree with you. Like we've talked about this for a couple of years now that you know Welsh really profiles as a right center back and a back three. So I wonder how much, and Rogers talked about the prioritization of flexibility. So I think, between him and Awada, we've got two players that really do profile as a right center back in a back three. And, now with Navrosky, Carter Vickers profiles very well as that kind of central. And I think Lagerbilk, I don't know. We need Enda for his linguistic talent. He profiles as that kind of center of
I can help you with that one. He pronounces it Liam Scales. You pronounce it Liam Scales. That's how
Liam
you do
Scales.
it.
Fair enough. Is he does profile as kind of a middle of a back three. Him and Carter Vickers, man, they're really rock solid. He's a bigger guy. I think he'll get better in the air. He's already proficient in the air, I would say, from what I've seen. But he's one of these more, you know, I think he's less of a ball player center half than like a just good old defender like that. He's very aggressive from what I've seen and that kind of. That doesn't mean that he's a donkey on the ball, but if you balance relative strengths and weaknesses, I think it seems like he's more of like a big physical, tough center back. And Navrosky, I think, would suit fine as a ball playing left sided because he's more two footed and carries the ball at pace. So if you think about that from a back three perspective, if you have a Wada and or Welsh on the right, Carter Vickers and Lagerbilk in the center, and then you got Navrosky on the left. That's you've got two flanks with mobile ball progression type center backs that are at least good enough in the air proficiently domestically. But I wonder how much of this might have an eye towards Europe. And what the game plan might be as we head towards having more defensive solidity heading into the Champions League. So within that context, we've talked about two homegrown player coming out of the academy. That's a huge issue that this would address as well. So yeah, I am actually a big fan of the signing, the extension. But I also agree with you, like. Yeah, and you never know. We always talk about these guys are humans. Maybe he's got a partner, and maybe he's settled and not the type of person that wants to move
Oh yeah,
away. Fair
of
enough.
course, of course.
Yeah, so that's a huge life change to go live in another country and disrupt all of these things. So maybe he's happy where he's at, and there's nothing wrong with
Yeah.
that. So yeah, I hope he's okay. I hope it's not too serious of an injury. I think generally good news for Celtic, that he's decided to stay. But that highlights this a burgeoning issue, and we talked about this as a concern heading into the second chapter of a Rogers era, which is that the injury bug is making uh, uh, a return trip along with Mister Rogers, unfortunately. And now we've got I think out with a calf. Carter Vickers, it sounds like a hamstring. Uh, Hatate out with a calf. It sounds like Welsh that doesn't sound like a muscle injury, or at least a boot wouldn't suggest that. More of an impact injury or something like that. And obviously, other guys that he inherited with Johnston coming back, Telio was already hurt. So, but it's important not to overstate this. But we talk about this issue. He's had soft tissue injury problems. Celtic have had soft tissue injury problems in the past, and for them to start kind of cropping up very early already in the summer, I think is concerning. So what are your thoughts on the injury bug already uh, showing up at Lennoxtown?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely concerning, and like you say, it tends to be a compounding factor here as well. So, well, first of all, I think it's too early to start, you know, saying that, oh, Rodgers is back, therefore the injuries have gone up, and making that sort of correlation. I think it's unfortunate, but what I, 'cause something I've studied, quite a lot back to when he was manager at Liverpool, and the number of injuries tended to ramp up over time, over seasons, really. So it wasn't an immediate thing. It's something that happened at Liverpool over time, and then happened at Celtic over time, and then I think happened at Leicester over time as well. So it was more of an accumulation of quite intense training methods and maybe attitudes to risk as far as player welfare. I'm reaching a little bit there because that's quite a serious thing to say. So I'm just speculating. That's not. I don't know that, right? But you follow the data. Those are the trends, is what I'm saying. Why would that happen? Well, here's one reason. Possibly, might not be the right reason. Might be. It'll be likely be many reasons. So I think it's just. I think at the moment it's just unfortunate. Is what I'm saying. But what I was going to go on to say is that sort of compounding nature of things. So you're without your best right back. So Ralston gets thrown in. Carter Vickers, so you're feeling a bit anxious about that. You've got a new centre back. He's suddenly having to play, and Carter Vickers is kind of ready, but is he ready? And do you put him back in a little bit too soon because you've not got your first choice right back, and you've got this new guy is stood behind him? And by the way, we are looking for a left back, so I'm not really sure about him either. So let's get the big guy back. I'm not saying that was what happened, but you can see, the sort of the thought process is we all know how football works. We all know how kind of venal and short-termist football is. Rodgers loses his first two games. Suddenly he's under massive pressure, right? So you throw Carter Vickers in. Oh, and he gets a hamstring injury. Is that unlucky? Well, what were the risk factors? How likely was it that that was going to happen? Did they know that Aberdeen weren't going to water the grass and it was going to be like playing at Rugby Park? I mean, all those things, right? And so, there's probably a little bit of decision making, risks management, weaknesses potentially, and there's probably a big dollop of bad luck here because, like you say, Tilio, that's bad luck. Johnston was inherited. Oh, we don't know what that was in pre-season, right? Pre-season game. I think he actually got quite a severe. I think it was a severe challenge actually. So that was bad luck. It looks like the Welsh one was bad luck, etc., etc. I mean, there's so many. Like I think you reeled them off already, right? So, and then as I say, the compounding impact is, well, I don't have my right first choice this, so I'm going to bring you back a bit quicker than I should have done, etc. And on all mushrooms, this is what happens. So I think we should be very careful. I think we're already looking like we're going to have to throw Lagerbielke in now. He's what, three-quarters of the way through his season in Sweden. So
Yep.
in essence, it shouldn't be a risk putting him in. He's game ready. He's played most of a season already in Sweden, so that shouldn't be a risk. But other than just that, how much more intense is the Scottish game versus the Swedish game? Probably a little bit faster, probably a little bit more physical. So again, risk factors. How significant is that? Rugby Park. How many? I suspect in Sweden he probably used to playing on Astro, etc. But
Oh, not
that's
that
probably not a
Astro.
not that Astro. No. So yeah, listen, I am concerned. I am worried. It's something I always worry about. I do sort of study it, um, but I think it's too early to be, hanging the noose round Rodgers on that one at this stage of the season for sure.
Yeah, and I think that's a reasonable position. I don't share it. I mean, I'm a lot more, um, I'm less charitable, and the reason why I'm less charitable,
Well,
and
it's
again, I've
football,
done
right?
well, right, but again, I'm still, I think I actually rewatched it this week because I was so annoyed with these injuries cropping up again. So again, I'm having a bias confirmed, and um, maybe I'm leaning towards being less charitable than I should be. But I went back and watched the portion of the Kieran Tierney appearance on Open Goal back from August of 2020. Um, and basically, if you go back and just watch that interview, the section where he recounts his last season at Celtic, and he almost painstakingly chronicles his injury path. I don't think you can come away from listening to him recount that period, and not have a serious problem with how his situation was handled, um, to the point where, like, if I was his father, I would have went berserk. I mean, the guy's career was put at risk, um, for to go play against Hibs in a league that we were well ahead in. You know what I mean? Like, this was not a one-off cup final. This was, months and months and months of cumulative damage being done to a young man's body, to the point where it took 18 months of rest for him to get even back to close to healthy. Right. So that's a level of, I would consider negligence. And that occurred under Rogers' tenure and then into Lennon's tenure. Um, there was talk of that, and Tierney in the interview even recounts the specific hip condition that he had. That Rogic had it, and Rogic and said to him, "Don't take the painkillers. They're gonna, tell them you can't play, because this is like a career threatening." He recounts in the interview how Johnny Hayes told him that Hayes knew multiple players that careers ended because of this injury. Um, so this is something that went on for quite a while at Celtic, and it's what we talked about under Ange, the fact that Kyogo played on a hamstring injury, you know, at St. Johnston, which again, if we can't win without our top striker at St. Johnston, um, why are you playing probably your best player on a bad hamstring, risking injury, which ended up in a ruptured hamstring and him out for 3-4 months, right? So this is the pattern so this is why I have less charitable. Is it to me? It seems institutional. It seems cultural. There's a pattern of behavior here and decision making that's been, I think, borderline, ridiculous at times. So that's the context. So you're right. All of these, I might be overdoing it relative to these early, because it's preseason, that kind of thing. But again, there was reporting done that the club had adopted software that is supposed to help with this, and the fact that they continue to have soft tissue injury problems suggests they're either not using it properly, or they've stopped using it for whatever reason, um, or the software doesn't work. Which again, suspect that's not the case, because there's a lot of clubs that are using it and seeing their injury rates plummet. So that's kind of the backdrop. That's why I'm like probably a cat ready to pounce on the situation, and maybe unfairly. So I hope that it gets better. But that's the context as to why I'm probably more skeptical and have this, because again I think of this from a risk management perspective, right? So I've talked about this before, is that when you layer risks on top of each other, these things tend to be nonlinear when they kick in. Um, and it's as you described, Alan. There's cascading effects here where you get guys that are out injured, and then the people that are left that have to fill in, they don't get the rest maybe they need. And that's what happened under Ange early, is that the squad was so thin that he flogged guys like David Turnbull to the point where he
Yeah,
tore his
Turnbull
hamstring.
was driven to the point of
Right.
breaking, basically.
Yeah, exactly. So, these things, if they're not managed kind of systematically and responsibly, can kind of get out of control. And that we're already, so this goes back to Lagerbilk, right? So, in the grand scheme of things, is Sunday's game. Like, if we get knocked out of the League Cup, would that be calamitous? Probably not. Given our fixture list, and it's kind of the least of the trophies, and um, that kind of thing. I'm not gonna be happy about it, but in the grand scheme of things, over the arc of time, would that be a calamity? Probably not. But this is a guy. So again, I looked at his profile when he has not played in like a technical short passing building out from the back team. So and his profile suggests that might be a weakness, actually, is kind of intricate short passing and press resistance, that kind of thing.
Mm.
Um, so he's going to get thrown into this cauldron of crap pitch. You're right. He's three quarters of the way through a season, but not playing in any way that's similar to what he's probably going to be asked to do under Brendan Rodgers, unless we just go long, and then maybe we will. um, maybe that might be the solution. But that's the kind of risk. Now he's getting thrown in because of an injury. And if he has a walloper kind of game, and I'm not saying he is, but you know, it wouldn't be outside the bounds of of possibility that he has a rough first game in these circumstances. Now all of a sudden the guy's off to a rough start, and it's easy. They kind of pile up as the potential of the risk. So I just wanted to lay that out there. But yeah, it's. I mean, you're talking if Carter Vickers is out a month, Hatate's out a month. I mean, that potentially puts the first derby at risk, and maybe even early in the Champions League campaign. So yeah, definitely concerning news so far. Let's move on to the rumor mill, because that's always the fun part. People talking about the recruitment. Who's coming, who's going, who's not. So there's been talk of the Wolves winger. I think the fullback from Nantes. There's my French again. Merlin, I think the wizard at left back. So what are your thoughts on those rumors so far?
Yeah, so I mean, it seems like there's a little bit of something in both of these, but again, Celtic probably have got lists of players, and if somebody gets wind that someone's on a list, it becomes, a big story, and it might just be, Celtic are probably any one time monitoring a lot of players, right? Doesn't necessarily mean they're going to sign them. So, let's see what happens. I think, what we can take from it more than the individuals is, if there's something in it, I tend to think, well, what's the profile of that player? And obviously, what position are they playing? And what's the profile of that player? Because even if nothing comes of it from a recruitment perspective, it's probably there's a little bit of insight there as to the way the club are thinking about how they need to strengthen. So, if we are indeed looking for a left back, then tick. That's a good thing for as far as I'm concerned. If we are looking for another wide attacking player, then what that says to me is that Rodgers probably sees Maeda as his second striker, and that he thinks he needs to backfill on the wide areas, and that therefore, Maeda, Kyogo, and O are essentially his 3-for-1 in the striking position, and therefore he needs to bolster another body on a more out wide. Although I think Podence can play potentially as anywhere across the sort of attacking midfield roles, fair enough. But Maeda wouldn't play as a 10, but I still think I would still come to the same conclusion. I wouldn't see Podence as he's not a box to box midfielder, for example. So, are we looking for a left back? If we are, it seems like we are. So that's great. Will it be Merlin? I don't know. Are we looking for a wide player? Looks like we are. What does that mean? Probably means that Maeda's going to be seen more as a striker. And then there seems to be an absence of box-to-box athletic midfielders, which I'll keep banging on about. And it's gone very quiet on the goalkeeping front as well, which again I was under the impression that perhaps that was a position that we were looking for. So is it realistic? I've kind of outlined four. Well, I think we need four starters basically in the positions that I've just outlined to come in. Is that likely in the next sort of 12 to 13 days, 2 weeks? Probably not. And we've got to get a lot of people out the door. We've still got this burgeoning squad. We've still got, if I look at my little squad list highlighted, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 players really that are realistic. They're in the first team squad and they're not going to play, and that would take you down to 25. So even if you got rid of those seven, you still have 25. So it feels like there's an awful lot of work to do for me. Um, I think we need four starters. I think they're in the positions that I've outlined. Looks like there's activity in two of those. It's gone quiet on the other two. So I'm getting a little bit, little bit impatient now, I suppose. A little bit concerned.
Yeah, we've
But
been
again,
preaching.
sorry, just to sort of last point on the whole sort of transfer window thing. I think it was on the Celtic Underground pod last night. It was stated that like for example, we talked about Kieran Tierney. That rumor has never been put to bed. That rumor has never died and never gone away, right? And as unlikely as it might sound to you or I, that's something which has never gone away, and it was mentioned on that podcast last night. Um, and if you think about it, I suspect Tierney's. If we just want to indulge that one for a while, but I'm using this to illustrate the point about the transfer window. A player like Tierney, he was apparently interested in Newcastle. Well, it looks like that door is closed, but there's other clubs. Sociedad were mentioned. Some other club, I can't even remember the name, was mentioned. Leipzig were mentioned, right? So will that door open for him? I don't know. There's probably a lot of moving parts for all those clubs, looking at all sorts of players. They might have to sell before they can buy. There's budgetary considerations. This is why a lot of these deals don't get done till like the last couple of
Yep.
days or hours of the transfer window, because there's so many things stacked up. A bit like buying a house. If you're in a chain, a lot of these things don't get resolved until they absolutely have to get resolved because time's running out. Brinkmanship and all that. So if there is anything in that particular Tierney rumour, that's one that you could see going to the absolute last limit, where Arsenal are like, right, we have to get rid of this guy. We have to get him off the wage bill because of FFP, because of our squad size, etc., etc., etc. And Tierney's people are like, well, we're not going to play at Arsenal. We have to move, otherwise you're not going to play football. At least for 6 months, you're going to be sat twiddling your thumbs, training with the youth team or whatever, right? So that comes to a head right near the end of the window. So based if we are looking at those sort of players, if we're looking in top five leagues for players that are on the fringes of squads and very good teams, and they're not quite sure how it's going to pan out. And Arsenal already had an injury to their fullback Timber
Right.
that they brought in.
Yep.
That doesn't
Yep.
seem to have changed Tierney's position or situation, but they've lost Zinchenko and they've lost Timber, who can play anywhere across the back. What if they lose their left back on whoever plays left back on Saturday? Does
Yep.
Tierney come back in? He probably does. Right. So
Yep.
there's loads of moving parts here, all sorts of things. And the better player that you're going for, the more moving parts there are. And if Celtic, and this is maybe me being naive, but if Celtic are in the market for top players off the caliber of Tierney, then there's going to be an awful lot of moving parts involved in those deals, and we might have to wait until the very last mashings of the transfer window, like we did to extract Jota from Benfica. And where it was obvious that Carter Vickers wasn't going to go back on loan to another Championship team, and actually, we could take him instead. That all took to the last day of the window before those things were resolved. So, again, I keep saying be patient. I'm being less patient, but that's the way I guess I try and rationalize it for myself at the moment.
Yeah, I guess that's everything is logical, and this is the part of as the clock ticks, the relative proportionality of the rational part of the brain versus the irrational part starts to recalibrate, and we get more nervous, and I share that, and I guess some of it is, and again, total naivete and ignorance on my part. Like, what's the bandwidth? Like, when you get down to it, and the clock's ticking, and we're in the market for, let's say, even hypothetically, like we get our mutual dream, which was those four positions, and they're shopping in that tier of player for all four. Is it even practical that they could do that within 24 hours or 36 hours at the end of the window? Like, I have no clue. Maybe it is. But the longer we go, the more that anxiety and the irrational and the lack of knowledge, and any sense of what a reasonable expectation would be, starts to overwhelm. But that, yeah, I think what's interesting is that the profiles of the players, and I don't have a strong a strong opposition to a player of Podence's profile. I mean, I think he's like 27. Um, if they were to pay 8-10 million for him, um, is it ideal? Probably not from my perspective, but you're the risk profile of that player is going to be very low, meaning that you kind of know what you're getting. The resale is probably not going to be great. So that, we've talked about this within the context of this season being so important. So I'd be fine with it. My preference would be if he was, maybe 22, 23, but to outlay that kind of money. But, and Merlin, I think, is closer to that window. He's in that kind of early 20s, would fit kind of more of the traditional profile. So, yeah, I think Podence would be kind of an obvious, Rogers kind of signing, meaning, be able to hit the ground running, high impact, of a level and a quality that's reliable, and make a material, upgrade in quality, probably even above and beyond Jota would kind of be my argument. From an athleticism, I mean, he seems to me to have that kind of, Premier League speed.
He's
um,
on. He's,
the-
he's like 5'5".
well, yeah, yeah, but that's, again, we're
Yeah,
probably not going to get the 6'2" version of that speed for the amount of
yeah,
money that we're going to spend. Yeah, especially at that
fair enough.
age. But yeah, so he kind of fills that gap of, bringing that level of power and pace. Maybe not the size, but for that position, I think it's probably less of an issue. Um, so yeah, that would be a very interesting signing to me. And but I find it encouraging that those are the kind of names that are being bandied about, because again, it aligns with what we've talked about in recent weeks, which is that this likely would take time towards the end of the window. That a lot of this anxiety was probably, you know overbearing, relative to the reality of the situation. So nothing's really changed that other than the clock sticking and that we're being nervous Nellies. So let's look towards the cup game then. I think we talked about it, after the first weekend and Rangers going in there and losing. Is it, McInnes has put together more of a traditional McInnes type of team, um, and probably done it in a pretty effective way. They gave, um, I think, who was it? Aberdeen. They gave, no, who was it? They just played.
Hearts. No, they got a
Hearts,
0-0 at
Hearts, yeah.
Hearts.
Yeah, they gave Hearts a pretty good match. And so I suspect, and I had mentioned this after, because I did watch that first game, and they when they beat Rangers, and suspected that they were going to have, particularly at Kilmarnock, we're going to give a lot of people headaches, because of, the profile of players that they have, the athleticism and size. And so yeah, I think this is going to be a good test going into Sunday. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, very very interesting team. I was actually I was actually a little bit even more impressed with their draw at Hearts than I was with their performance on the first day, because obviously the Rangers had a lot of new players in for sure. I was stunned at how poor all their forward players are that they've acquired for apparently huge amounts of money. Whereas Hearts, if you saw them last night, I mean, Boyce and Shankland. Now, I think Boyce only played 30 minutes against Kilmarnock, so
Yeah,
they didn't, and he's obviously come back from a long injury. So Kilmarnock didn't get the full exposure to that front pairing, or one sits kind of behind the other. But Hearts looked a danger. I thought Hearts looked really good last night. I watched them against Rosenborg, and it had all the helter skelter energy that you'd expect. A lot of flying into tackles and charging around the pitch and all that stuff that you'd expect from a Hearts team at home. But there's decent quality there, and especially up front. Up front, they're terrific. As I say, Boyce and Shankland, I think together are really clever players, and they've got some good energy with the Oda and another Japanese lad, Tagawa, I think they've signed. Um, and they've got a lot of they've got a bit of youthful legs that your Cochrane puts in a good shift, etc. And they've got a pretty solid sort of back line. So Hearts are a decent team, and Kilmarnock actually put up a good account of themselves in getting a draw there. So this won't be easy. I mean, the thing that struck me in the first two games is I've started to track the number of passes played in each half, which might sound an obvious thing, but it's not something I've kind of been able to get access to before. But I think SofaScore actually make it available now. And what is interesting, and it's only two games, obviously, but is that the team with the highest proportion of their passes play in opposition half, meaning, let's say you play 100 passes, your team's played 100 passes. Right, of those 100 passes, Kilmarnock play 67 of them in your half, and only 33 in their own half. Meaning they try and play all their football it's close to your goal, and they don't play any football near their own goal. Whereas if you flip that round, Celtic are almost the opposite. They have the most passes in their own half, as a proportion, less in the opposition half. But obviously, Celtic are making far more passes in total. So Celtic will make far more passes in Kilmarnock's half than Kilmarnock will in Celtic's half, but the proportionality will be the opposite, is what I'm trying to say. So what does that mean? It means that they're going to get the ball forward very quickly, and they're going to try and then to hunt in packs, because they've not actually got big lumping centre. I think, well, they do. Vassal's still there, but so far they've played Watkins and Kennedy. Well, Kennedy's really a winger, um, and if you've been watching the Women's World Cup, sort of, England's Laura Hemp, who's traditionally a winger, that's been played as almost as a sort of second striker and been absolutely brilliant. I'm not saying Kennedy's as good as Laura Hemp, but he's not. But it's that similar thing of you suddenly got a very mobile player playing as a striker, and then Watkins, he's a grafter, right? He'll run the channels all day long. He'll bash into people. He'll be a nuisance, and they've got kind of two nuisances up front that will run and run and run and hassle and harry, and then they've got a pretty solid back line. Lewis Mayo looks a good young player. Finlay and Dees were both young Celtic players, and they've kind of matured into good, solid sort of defenders. And then you've got sort of Armstrong as their kind of box of tricks. They're kind of little bit of unpredictability, and then the midfield's pretty sort of workmanlike otherwise. So they're going to, like you say, I think they look very coherent against the Rangers on opening day, which to bed the myth that if you make lots of changes you can't be coherent. Apparently, we should all think that that's Mickey Beale's first game in charge, because the rest don't count because he's got some new players. McInnes did a great job in assimilating a lot of new players and putting in. It wasn't a great footballing performance in the sense of it was wonderful football. It was just an effective, coherent plan that he implemented. His team implemented it well. They were on the wrong end of XG, but it was a bit like, think back to Neil Lennon's season, where you sort of think, yeah, we generated 1.5 XG. Well, yeah, but they generated nearly one. That's 0.5 of a difference. It allows
Yep.
too much
Coin
room
flip.
for,
Yep.
yeah, for what happened, which is your centre back, falls asleep when a long throw in comes in, and it falls really nicely for a guy just to sweep the ball in, and then suddenly their backs are up, and you haven't got the ability to kind of fight back from there. So hopefully they'll have a lot of games like that this season, and with the strikers they've got, that may well happen. But anyway, back to Kilmarnock. Yeah, so that was my main kind of takeaway. I think it was just that's the thing that struck me about them. I mean, you've probably done a bit more of a deeper dive, maybe, but it was just that they've got the highest ratio of passes in the opposition half. So
Yep.
that's gonna be how they're not gonna fanny about at the back. They're just gonna get it into our
Well,
half as quickly as possible.
so this is why I actually get a little more nervous with this sort of an opponent, particularly on that pitch. So it's I mentioned it last week. It's almost like an upgraded version of Livingston, with McInnes managing at Kilmarnock, in the sense that one of the challenges we've had with Livingston is if it's just a matter of coherence and embracing a style of play that enhances their competitive advantages of having that home pitch. And, I think that's kind of what he has now. I mean, they're not going to pretend to play it out from the back. So they're going to shell balls and play for second balls, which on a smaller pitch with that, I'm sure they won't have watered it to the level that they maybe could have, that kind of thing. So it'll be bouncy and, chaos. It's basically like a chaos pitch. And if you optimize your style of play for chaos, and they've got guys like Armstrong, who has at least a burst of pace and a little bit of creativity, which again, 1v1 against somebody like Greg Taylor, we know who the pacier player is going to be. And they've got athletes now to the point where, when McInnes does this kind of man-to-man marking in midfield, we're kind of at a deficit right now in that regard, meaning that with Hatate out and, we're probably going to get, one would think, Turnbull. I mean, maybe we'll see Holm. That would kind of be a surprise selection maybe. But this goes back to, I was talking about the Lagerbill, risk factors and the benchmarking thing I did. So he was the most active center back in the peer group that I looked at in his league for duels. But that would put him in like right around the midpoint of the Scottish league. So that speaks to your point about the difference in, the chaos and the hectic nature of the pace of play in Scotland relative to he's come from Sweden or was it Norway? I forget, but
Sweden,
Sweden,
Elfsborg,
yep.
yeah.
Right, that's right. So you take the normal conditions being completely different, and then you throw them against a McInnes team on that pitch at Kilmarnock, with us maybe not having our most athletic midfield potentially available. And again, you talk about the risk stacking, and is he going to just be able to walk in and play this style of play that's maybe a little different for him when he just signed? He's going to get maybe two, 3 training sessions, maybe 4 before going into that. So that's the kind of thing, because this is a huge opportunity for Kilmarnock, to potentially knock us out of a cup.
I mean, he's going to get 4 more training sessions than Starfelt got before he was thrown in against Hearts.
Right.
But,
Yeah.
but the good thing is, I would say, from a Celtic perspective, is we're not going to treat this as a midweek cup game between heavy league. We're on a light schedule at the moment, 1 game a week.
Yep.
So this is going to be the strongest team. In fact, we need to play the strongest team because we need to get everybody more used to the system, more in tune with what Rodgers wants the team to do, etc. So it's going to be the strongest team available. As I say, there was a big uptick in security in the midfield when Hatate came on versus Turnbull, because Turnbull's the one midfielder that we have that's defensively even less active than Hatate. So Hatate, and just by holding his position, really helped out McGregor. Unfortunately, he's injured, so I'd be surprised if we went back to Hatate. Frankly, sorry, to Turnbull. Sorry, frankly, I do wonder if Holm, given his quite busy and little cameo against Aberdeen, whether he might be a surprise inclusion as the sort of third midfielder. I wouldn't be surprised. I don't think the pitch, again, he's Norwegian. He's not going to be faced by an artificial pitch or anything like that. And so yeah, that would be that'd be my guess. Really, is that we'll actually, for the same reason as we were better in the second half against. We're going to be playing again a team that's going to try and be quite direct, try and push on, isn't going to sit bunker back, I don't think. Therefore, I think the transition risk is there, and therefore, for me, the security would be in playing home, or Iwata even, although he doesn't seem to be in favour at the moment.
Well, this is what we were looking for, Alan, which was a lot more uncertainty analytically heading into these games in the Rodgers era, and I think we're
Careful what you wish
definitely.
for. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. We're definitely getting to enjoy it now. So I think Sunday, because I'm interested to see what McInnes does. Meaning that where does he end up on that dial as far as that's the the tantalizing aspect now, which is that because these two teams have had at least some success high pressing us, um, how many opposing managers decide to have a go with that for a period of time at least, whether it's something that they can um, enforce for or deploy for the full 90 minutes or 100 minutes, I think will be interesting. Well, I think we're going to wrap it up there. We're up to our hour for the show. We've bloviated for far too long. So as usual, we'll put in the part here where if you want to subscribe, leave comments on iTunes for us. Subscribe at your podcast distributor of preference, or on YouTube. We certainly appreciate it. It helps grow the channel and pay for Enda's private jet as he's off gallivanting as usual. So hope everyone enjoys the game on Sunday, and I'll talk to you next week, Alan.